HTML forms are frequently used on web pages to receive user input. A typical HTML form is consisted of a number of input fields and a submit button. Example of an HTML form could be a user registration form, login form, feedback form, inquiry form, and so on. There are two important parts of creating HTML forms. One part is designing HTML form with all the necessary input fields and buttons. And another part is to write the script which validates form data and send the data to the server for further processing. Writing a script to handle the form data is beyond the scope of this tutorial, as it requires programming skills like PHP, Perl, Python, and so on. Hello, this is Feroz, and you are learning how to design web pages using HTML. I suggest you subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon so that you will be automatically notified for our subsequent lessons. So, without any further ado, let's look at the list of the topics that we are covering in our today's lesson. Let's start with the topic number 1, HTML form element. HTML form element is the parent element for creating HTML form. It is a container element, which means the form tag has its corresponding end tag to define the boundary of the HTML form. Let's look at the syntax of the HTML form. There are a number of HTML attributes that can be used with the HTML form element, like the name attribute, the action attribute, the method attribute, target attributes, the autocomplete attribute. Let's discuss each of these attributes in details.
You can give a name for your HTML form by using the name attribute. The user input that you receive on an HTML form are often processed using some kind of scripts, such as client-side script for input validation and server-side script for input processing. The name you specify for your HTML form is used by the script as a reference for that form. You can use the action attribute to specify the name of the program in the server that handles the user input when a form is submitted. For example, to process the user input by a PHP program, you will specify the file name like userinput.php. The method attribute is used to specify one of the two methods to send user input collected on an HTML form to the server. The get method is a default method, which uses URL variable or HTTP header to send user input to the server. For example, if you are using get method to send login information, the user ID and the password will be sending using the URL like this, which is easily visible and not secure for sensitive data. Besides, the method is not suitable for sending data more than 2 kilobytes. The post method is suitable for sending large amount of data as there are no data size limitations. Besides, the post method is secure as it uses HTTP body to send data to the server, which is not visible to the user.
HTML form has a number of child elements. These child elements are used to construct the body of an HTML form depending on what kind of form you are creating. For example, to create a login form, you probably need an input box and a submit button. However, to create a registration form, you will probably need an almost all child elements such as input element, select element, option element, text element, and so on. Let's learn how to use each of these form elements to create a complete HTML form.
HTML input element is most commonly used child element for HTML form, and there are various types of input elements. We specify them using type attribute like input type text, input type checkbox, input type button, and so on. Let's try some example of using input elements. Input type text allows you to create text box on your HTML form. Besides the type attribute, we also commonly use the ID and the name attribute with an input element. The ID attribute is used as an unique identifier to represent the input element, whereas the name attribute is used as a variable that holds or refers to the user data. The input type password is similar to the input type text, except that input type password allows you to create a password field. By default, the password field will be masked, so that as a user type the password, others cannot read the password. The input type radio allows you to create a radio button, which is used to create an option or choice. You are allowed to choose only one option among a number of given choices. Options or choices are created as a group, where every option will have the same name but different value. When a user selects an option, the value for the selected option is sent to the server upon submission of the form. Unlike input type radio, input type checkbox allows you to create option or choice where you are allowed to select more than one option. The input type submit allows you to create a submit button, which is used to submit or send form data to the server. The input type reset is used to create the reset button, which is commonly seen next to the submit button. The button allows you to reset the all data entered into the form to its default value. The input type buttons allow you to create buttons commonly used to execute client-side scripts like JavaScript. The input type email is similar to the input type text, except that the input type email is used to create an input field for email address. The input type file creates a file select field for upload. When you click the field, it invokes the open dialog box for selecting the file for uploading. The select element is used to create a drop-down list. A drop-down list is an HTML control which displays a collapsible list of options where you can select an option from the list. Let's look at the syntax for creating a drop-down list box. The drop-down list that you have created in our previous exercise allows you to select only one item at a time. However, if you wish to allow your user to select multiple items, then you should add another attribute called multiple in the select element. Let's look at the example. When you use the multiple attribute, the drop-down list box changes into a multiple selection list box. Now you should be able to select multiple items from the list box by clicking each item while holding the Shift key. The text area elements allow you to create multiple line text box, which is generally used for customer feedback, comments, and so on. Besides the name attribute, the text area elements also takes rows and columns attribute to define the size of the text area in terms of number of rows and columns.
Okay guys, that's all for our today's lesson. If you have any query, please write in the comment section. If you haven't subscribed the channel, please consider subscribing. See you in our next lesson. Until then, happy learning.